Hey, brand builder, Rory Vaden here. Thank you so much for taking the time to check out this interview. As always, it's our honor to provide it to you for free. And wanted to let you know there's no big sales pitch or anything coming at the end. However, if you are someone who is looking to build and monetize your personal brand, we would love to talk to you and get to know you a little bit and hear about some of your dreams and visions and share with you a little bit about what we're up to see if we might be a fit. So if you're interested in a free strategy call with someone from our team, we would love to hear from you. You can do that at brandbuildersgroup.com/podcall, brandbuildersgroup.com/podcall. We hope to talk to you soon.
Well, you probably could tell from that interview with Randy that it hit me very, very hard. His story of losing his family all in one moment, basically, really impacted me deeply personally. And I know this episode, that interview, and this episode that you're about to experience, if you stick around, are very much off the beaten path of what the typical content that we provide. But ultimately, the reason that we exist at Brand Builders Group is to not only curate the voices that will shape the world, but to make the world a better place and make the people a better place. And can't really do that without having conversations around personal development and talking about death. And when I say that interview impacted me deeply, it very much did, and it actually was one of a chain of events that have happened recently. That over the last couple of years, I have been really diving deeply into learning about heaven and learning, just exploring the concept of heaven, exploring concepts around life after death and death itself and, what happens. And for a couple years and for sure the better part intensely of the last year, I have been working on I guess what I'll call a secret project. And I've been working a lot on it in the nights, in the early hours of the morning. I'm talking that I've been waking up very early working on this on the weekends while the kids are napping, and it is something that I have put together, and I don't even know exactly what it is yet. And what it is, I don't in terms of what this is going to shake out to be, but it is questions that wrestle with the afterlife, and specifically, I'm calling this eternal life. And I'm now going so far to call it as a book, but I didn't really expect that it would be a book. That was never part of my original intention, but now I do think this is going to become a book. And so I started compiling basically what I have spent decades studying in my personal life about Jesus of Nazareth, the historical figure. And I have, as a logical, analytical person, struggled, frankly, to believe in some of the seemingly irrational elements of the Christian faith, and struggle a little bit from a logical perspective to believe in things like resurrections and miracles and heaven. And so over the course of my life, really, the last couple decades, I have sort of in the background from all of the work that I've done as an author and a speaker in a secular front and in a business way and as an entrepreneur, which is still my plan. I'm not leaving that at all. But I have been on a deep search on my own to understand and validate some of the, arguments for and against Christianity. And I felt like I'm not ready to release the whole thing for the world. And in fact, it's 7 questions. So here's what it's called. It's called Eternal Life: 7 questions that every intelligent skeptic should ask about Jesus of Nazareth. And it is an academic look, a historical look, a archaeological look, at some of the evidence for and against, really, the life of Jesus Christ, who people call Jesus Christ, but Jesus of Nazareth, this historical figure, this person. And did he really exist? Was he a really person? Was he really a person? And how does that tie into faith and spirituality and eternal life and life after death? So it's something I've been exploring for years, and it has become a 87-page outline. And that 87-page outline, I have, added detail to, and especially in the last year, have put more scrutiny around and more citations to, and research and just documenting sources and things like that. And it's nearly ready for release. It's not ready for release. And honestly, I've struggled about even presenting it here because it's not ready yet. And I didn't know if it was going to be a book or a YouTube series. Now what I think it will be is I do think it will be a podcast mini series. But it's going to be long. It's seven full episodes, and each episode is like a couple hours. So it's a lot of content. And so we're not going to release all of that content here on this podcast, just because this podcast is the influential personal brand podcast, and we talk typically about personal brand strategy and everything, but I don't really have anywhere else to release it as of right now. So what you're about to hear is the first of what will be 7 episodes in this series. The other 7 or the other 6 will probably live in a separate podcast feed one day, but they're not all done. In full transparency, I've only recorded 3 of them so far. They're all outlined, and I'm working on them. And I'm trying to find blocks of time to get these recorded to get out to the world. And so it likely will be its own separate podcast episode, or not episode, series, like its own podcast, because it will be so long. And I don't think it's the right thing to release it in full here, just because it's a lot of content, and it's sort of off the the norm of what to expect here. So that said, I want to alert you that you might skip over this episode, right? Like if you're not interested in a conversation around eternal life or faith or spirituality, you probably should just skip over this episode. But the interview with Randy was the perfect time, I guess, to segue into this. And even though I'm not really ready to release this, so to speak, I felt like this was the perfect transition and the perfect episode to do it. And so we're going to release it, and you're getting it right now. So again, you might skip over it, but this is something that's really, really important. And, I'll explain why. But this series, I'll call it a series, which I do think it'll become a book, and I don't know when it'll come a book or how or what that looks like. I don't really know what this is. All I know is I feel led to share this with you and with the world. And as it currently stands, this is the platform that I have to do that. And so I'm just making it available here. And then I'll give you instructions at some other point about where you can go listen to the rest of it. But here's what this series is called. It's called Eternal Life: 7 Questions That Every Intelligent Skeptic Should Ask About Jesus of Nazareth. And this series is actually dedicated to my sons. This is dedicated to Jasper and Liam, because if I were to die tomorrow, I would want them to know, I'd want them to know the logical reasons and the historical reasons and the academic reasons and the archaeological reasons why Daddy believes in miracles, a resurrection, and the story of Jesus of Nazareth as Messiah and Christ. And so this is dedicated to Jasper and Liam. I really have created this for them because after hearing Randy's story, I thought, what if that happened to me? And what if I wasn't here to explain to my kids the logical reasons? Because the faith reasons, faith is faith, and it's believing and it's trusting, and it's very, a matter of the heart. But I think a lot of people who struggle with a lack of faith, it's not so much they have a lack of faith, but a lack of research. And they haven't made the time to really dive in and look at the evidence, the worldly evidence, not just the spiritual things and a feeling and an emotion and a, what your family says and what your pastor said or your priest or your, whoever, not just like what you've been told, but to actually look at the evidence that exists for the man that was Jesus of Nazareth and what that has to do with eternal life. So the second group of people that this is dedicated to is that this is dedicated to the intelligent skeptics who are out there, to the people who, just like me, struggle to believe in some of the seemingly irrational elements of Christianity. This is dedicated to you. Miracles and a resurrection and life after death. I mean, honestly, like even when I say it now, I'm like, really? Do I believe in that? Like, it's weird that I believe in it, but it's like, no, I fully believe in it. I wholeheartedly believe in it. And I do faithfully believe in it as a matter of faith and a matter of the heart. But I actually think it doesn't require as much faith as you think once you look at the evidence that supports these things. And so this is a journey of a critical analysis of the evidence around this person called Jesus. So it's, hopefully you trust and know it's not meant to be pushy or aggressive, or it's not going to make anyone, feel bad. This is really an objective look, an unemotional look. It's in many ways not even a spiritual discussion. It's really a logical discussion. And again, I don't know exactly what this is. I just know that I felt called to document it. And I now feel called to record it for my sons, just in case something were to ever happen to me. And now I think that there's probably people out there who go, maybe you even have been following this podcast and you go, what, Rory, you really believe in all that stuff? Like, you really believe in a heaven and eternity and, somebody who died, and the answer is yes, I do. And let me explain why, not just the emotional side, but the evidence behind it. So I'm not planning on releasing all of these here, but I'm going to release the first one. And I talked about it with AJ and she agreed and said, let's release the first one on our podcast and let's see what the response is to people. And again, I hope that you won't hate us or be mad or any of that stuff. I mean, I would just invite you to go, if you're not curious at all about this, just skip over this one. This is not going to be the shape and the form of this podcast going forward. We will put this somewhere separately, but this is the perfect place to interject it based on that interview with Randy, which if you didn't listen to that interview with Randy, I mean, go listen to it. This guy's story is incredible and sad, but also practical in terms of how to deal with grief and that kind of stuff. And then, it causes you to ask the questions of like, what happens after you die? So that was sort of the door opener. And I just felt like this fell in the lap to go, I guess this is it. I'm not really ready to release this, but here we go. Also, this is going to be a very long episode, unusually long. And I also want to let you know up front, the format of the show is not changing. This is an abnormality. And we do that occasionally. I did an episode a while back called 7 Reasons Why I Stopped Drinking. I think it was, several months ago. And that became one of our most popular downloaded episodes. So here again, I am taking a risk. I'm putting this out there, and it really would help me to hear your feedback one way or the other. Please don't leave it as an iTunes review, because I don't think it's a fair thing for other people to to read a review on this episode and decipher whether or not that's what this whole podcast is about. But, if you would just email, info@brandbuildersgroup.com, or just go over on Instagram. My handle is @RoryVaden. And, just leave me a comment there or something like that, or shoot me a DM or whatever. I do want to hear your feedback. But I don't think it's not as a review. That's not really fair to anybody one way or the other, right? Like, if you love this episode, I also don't think it's fair to go like, oh man, this is an amazing podcast. It's like, it's not really what the show's about. And our plan is, again, not to change the direction. So anyways, that's like the world's longest disclaimer, but I wanted to let you know up front, like, this is a very, very different episode. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope it is powerful for you. It's meant for people who are intelligent skeptics, people who struggle to believe in, some of these things, and just an analytical and a logical look at why I do believe in miracles, a resurrection, and this person named Jesus. So anyways, enjoy, and I'll look forward to your feedback, and we'll continue our normal programming, we'll resume normal scheduled programming next week. But for now, here is the first official episode, and the first in the series, Eternal Life, 7 questions that every intelligent skeptic should ask themselves about Jesus of Nazareth. Enjoy. What is your strategy against death? I mean that seriously. What is your strategy for dealing with, defeating, or overcoming death? What is your philosophy about death? What do you believe about what happens after death? Ironically, this is probably one of the most important, if perhaps not the single most important questions for you to answer during your life. And yet, many of us, speaking at least for myself, my friends, my family, many of the people that I know and interface with, many of us spend a shockingly little amount of time thinking about or answering or even having any crafted philosophy at all about what happens after we die. And to me, from a logical standpoint, you put all religion and spirituality and theism aside, from a purely logical standpoint, this seems like an important question, one that we should spend a little bit of time thinking about, because one thing that I know is that 100% of humans that have ever lived have also died. Death has a 100% success rate. There is nobody that death hasn't gotten, right? Like, nobody who is still on this planet who once was born, who is still here now hundreds or thousands of years after they've been born. Everybody is gone. They have all died or disappeared, or died and disappeared. And so there's a pretty high likelihood that you and me and everyone we know is going to die sooner or later. And I don't mean to be morbid about that, but I do mean to present you and to present myself with the sobering reality that we're going to die. We're not going to be here. We are, at some point, our bodies in their current form, in this current place, are going to cease to exist in the way that they exist now. And so my question is, what is your strategy for that? What exactly do you believe about the afterlife? Do you believe in reincarnation? Maybe you do. If you do, though, why? Like, what evidence is there for reincarnation? What logical or academic or scientific support, beyond just your own personal convictions, beyond your own feelings, beyond your own instincts, beyond your own emotions, what evidence is there to support that that's real? I'm not saying that you have to have evidence for that. All of us, of course, you, myself included, we are all welcome to have whatever beliefs that we choose. But for me, as an analytic, not somebody who's a pastor, but as someone who is a critical thinker, someone who is logical, someone who is systematic and pragmatic and practical, I just am curious to know, is there any evidence for what you believe? And what is the evidence for what you believe? Maybe you believe in heaven. So what evidence is there for that? And how do you get into heaven? And is heaven really real? And if there is a heaven, how confident are you that you are going to get in? Right? Like, and what is that based on? So a lot of people, I've had these conversations, right? Anecdotally here, I'm speaking, but I've been around for more than 40 years in my life, and have had a lot of. I would consider myself a critical thinker, somebody who explores difficult and tough topics, and so as I've asked people, like, how do you get to heaven? A lot of people will say something like, well, you just have to be a good person, which, there's a big part of me that goes, yeah, I buy that. That makes sense to me. Like, sort of intuitively, it seems like if you live a good life, if you're a good person, that you would maybe be rewarded with more life beyond life, or life after death, or eternal life. But how confident are you in that? And the other question that I struggle with, and this is maybe just my logical, rational mind, like, call me critical, but how good is good enough? Like, if getting into heaven means you have to be a good person, then I can't help but ask, and maybe you don't think this way, but I'm just sharing with you, like, how I process it. I go, well, okay, then where is the dividing line exactly of who is good enough and what is good enough? And obviously, selfishly, I want to know which side of that line do I fall on? And then also, who is the judge of that, right? And so maybe we would say, okay, well, God's the judge, so maybe you believe in God, but maybe you don't believe in God at all. And so then, that begs the question, what do you believe? Have you even really thought about it? And I want to say, I don't think you're a bad person if you haven't thought about it. I think it's easy to go through life without thinking about this. It's a morbid question, right? It's a difficult topic. It's not like any of us wake up and go, let's spend my day today pontificating what's going to happen to me when I die, right? Like, there's a million things that are more exciting and more entertaining to do than that. But it doesn't change the fact that this is perhaps the most poignant and important and powerful and significant question of your life, which is, what happens after you die? And if it is about just being good, then how good is it? And am I good enough? And who is the judge of what is good? And then also, what happens to those who are not quite good enough? Wherever that line is, which, at least for me, doesn't seem clear. I've never had anyone be able to articulate clearly what that is. It's like, well, you follow the law, but a lot of people don't agree with every law that there is, and every country has different laws, and every state, every county has different laws, and at least in the US. And so you go, well, I don't know that it's really law. Like, there's a pretty big gray area there. And so, surprisingly, I find that this is not that clear. In fact, I have even found that there are people who believe in heaven as well as people who don't believe in heaven. And there are people who are spiritual, and there are people who are not that spiritual. And not very many of any of those people are all that clear on who gets into heaven and who doesn't. And how do you get there and how do you not? And even fewer people even yet still have any type of clear picture of what heaven is, or where it is, or what does it look like, or what is it like, and what do you do? And so, as I've wandered around the earth for 40 plus years, I've started exploring some of these questions, some of these answers, right? Not because I care to be a pastor or a spiritual teacher. I do not. That is not my calling. It's not how I have spent the majority of my life. It's not a part of my profession. Yet, I can't escape. My mind cannot escape these questions to go, well, what's the resolution here? I mean, is this really all there is? And in my search for some of these answers to some of these questions, I have discovered that Christianity, okay, as documented according to the Bible, has clear answers. I'm not going to go so far here to tell you that they are right. My goal is not to tell you what is right. I want you to decide for yourself what is right. But what I do feel confident in telling you is that Christianity, according to the Bible, not according to churches, pastors, religions, but as according to the Bible, historical manuscripts, they provide clear answers, crystal clear answers on who gets into heaven, how you get into heaven, and what heaven is like. And so what I want to encourage you to consider, just as a fellow human, as a fellow citizen of civilization, I just want to encourage you, and I want to invite you to go, if you're not 100% crystal clear on how death after life works, or how life after death works or doesn't work, if you're not 100% clear, then I want to just invite you to stick around and be open-minded, or just be open to hearing what I believe is very, very clear answers in terms of Christianity. Now, you may not agree with them, and that's totally your prerogative, right? My goal here is not to convince you of anything. What my goal, as I shared in this dedication, is to do is really to lay out for my own children, my own sons, why I've come to believe what I have come to believe. And honestly, when they become grown men, they may choose to believe something else. That's not a choice that I can control. It is a choice that they control. But I couldn't help but think that if somehow I died, or if something happened to me between now and when they become grown men, when you, Jasper, and when you, Liam, become old enough to wrestle with some of these questions yourself, I couldn't accept the idea that if I were not around to talk to you about it, that I wouldn't have at least left behind a documentation of my own journey, an exploration for facts, a determination of sequencing, and an exploration of archaeology and history and logic and rationale. And so that is what this is. That is why I've put this series together. And I feel confident saying Christianity provides clear answers. Now, you don't have to agree with them. You certainly don't have to like them. You don't have to accept them. But if you don't have complete clarity, and if you're not completely confident in eternal life based on what you believe now, then I would just encourage you to finish this series, to just go through it, and just at least you will have one set of ideology that has a clear potential offering. And you can evaluate for yourself whether or not you believe it, but at least you'll have something that's clear. Now, you may have found something else on your own. Again, talking to my sons here, but I'm talking to you too. You may have found something else that works for you. You maybe have found something else in your life that you go, I'm 100% confident this is how it works. I'm 100% clear this is how it works. I'm totally secure. I have every bit of evidence to believe that it is real and true and accurate. Or you've just made a decision that evidence is not that important to you, and you go, I don't need evidence. I just believe what I believe. And if that's you, that's totally fine. Like, that's your prerogative. But if you're not, or if you're open-minded to exploring, then I just want to encourage you to stay here. Now, I want to be clear up front. When I say Christianity, I want to make sure that you understand that I'm not talking about religion, quote unquote religion, meaning I'm not referring to the infrastructure of churches and pastors and rituals and programs. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the buildings, and I'm not talking about songs. I'm not talking about the practices and nor the people who we often think of when we think of religion. When I refer to Christianity, what I will be referring to for the remainder of this series is I'm referring to ancient texts and historical manuscripts that surround and point to and document the life of an individual person named Jesus of Nazareth, more commonly known as the Bible, right? But the Bible is not a nonfiction. The Bible is not a fiction book. It is not made up, right? Whether you believe it or not is up to you, but it is not a fake story or a creative story or an imagined story. At least that's not the intent of it, right? That's not how it was assembled, which we'll talk about. Where did the Bible come from, and what is the Bible, and how did the things that are in the Bible even get included in there? We'll talk about that, because that's some of what I've explored as an intelligent skeptic, right? I am critical, right? I'm sorry. I don't take people's word for things. I like to investigate and explore. So I'll share some of that journey with you. But for the purpose of this conversation and for this series, the Bible is my source of truth. And so if you wanted to take issue with me, you're welcome to do that, of course. I may or may not be available for a response, but where you would be welcome and invited to take issue is on the Bible, right? That's where I'm speaking from. So I'm not working on interpretations from like pastors and stuff. Although there are some third-party references, and I will point those out. So that's what Christianity, at least, is for me. The definition is as it's contained in the ancient texts and the historical manuscripts that make up the Bible. But I have to also say this: while Christianity and the Bible are very clear about what happens after death, how do you get into heaven, who gets into heaven, okay? It's very clear on that. I have to also say, like, I couldn't tell you that I also struggle to believe some of the things in the Bible. It has a lot of things that are, again, I'm just being honest here, they're hard for me to believe. Things like miracles, resurrections, like what's a resurrection? Dead people coming alive, global floods, the story of the creation of earth, even just the idea of heaven. Like, there's a part of me spiritually that just wants to believe it, but there's a part of my humanity that just goes, I don't even know what that would be like, right? And God, right? So some of these things are just hard to believe. And I have to be honest and say that those things, some of those things and some other things are difficult for me to believe. And I hope that is also an invitation to you to go, if some of those things you struggle to believe, I think that's okay. I think that's okay. And we'll walk through some of this together. But another thing that is clear about Christianity, okay? So if you're new to this exploration of spirituality or Christianity specifically, one thing that is clear about Christianity is that it is entirely built around one central figure, a person, an actual human. And this is Jesus of Nazareth, a person that supposedly walked this earth like you and me. And we will look at that, and we will analyze and diagnose the likelihood of that, even as an assumption that there was a person named Jesus who actually was a real human. And so we'll explore that. That's part of what we're going to unpack in this series. But one of the things that's fascinating to me about Jesus is that Jesus is not just a deity, meaning he's not just a God. He's not just a spiritual figure, but according to the Bible, that Jesus is an actual person that walked this earth, which immediately immediately separates him from all other gods, at least all the other gods that I have explored or that I have tried to, at least understand. And I'm not an expert on all this, right? I have not spent an expert studying all of theology, but of the most popular religions, I know I have at least a basic understanding of some of them, or I think I have at least a basic understanding of them. And again, as I'm trying to find answers for myself, for my life, for my family, that it is a very unique characteristic of the Christian religion that it is based on a human person. Okay. There are other religions, right, that have other humans that are part of them, Muhammad, but Muhammad is a prophet, not God incarnate. So that is a dividing line of spiritual and realistic beliefs of how it works, that Christians believe that Jesus was a human that walked the earth and that he also was a deity, that he was God incarnate, God as man, and fully God and fully human. That is a very specific distinction, a very unique characteristic of the Christian faith. And Jesus is the central figurehead. He is the cornerstone. He is the linchpin. He is, you could almost think of it like the bottleneck. The Christian religion all comes down to Jesus. So if you could disprove the existence of Jesus, or if you could disprove the divine nature of Jesus, or if you could disprove the resurrection of Jesus, you would disprove all of Christianity. Christianity hinges upon, it is attached to, it is unequivocally like linked to the story and the life of Jesus of Nazareth. And so in order to prove all of the elements of Christianity, you must first be able to prove that Jesus of Nazareth, which many people call the Christ, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, right? You must first be able to prove that Christ existed. Further, okay, though it's not just enough to say that he was a human that walked the earth, okay? That's step one. But further, you must be able to prove that he was and is who he said he was, which was the Son of God. Jesus referred to himself as the Son of God, which becomes a really important part of this historical scrutiny, because that is a big, audacious, bold claim. I mean, I don't know how many friends you have in your life that have ever that who claim to be God, right? There's some people that that maybe act like it or think they kind of are, but they probably don't claim to be it. Jesus of Nazareth directly, boldly, clearly, assertively claimed that he is the Son of God. Okay, so you must be able to prove that Jesus was real as a person. We must be able to prove that he is somehow the Son of God. How do we prove that? I know that's a big question. We're going to explore that. And then further still, you would have to prove that Jesus was murdered and then raised from the dead. If you can't prove those things, then there is no basis for the Christian faith. You could prove everything else in the Bible. Like if you could prove everything else in the Bible, but you can't prove those things. If you can't prove that Jesus lived, was a human, if you can't prove he's the Son of God, if you can't prove that he died and was fully dead in human form, and if you can't prove that he resurrected from the dead and came back to life, if you can't prove those four things, then there is no proof of Christianity. There's nothing else nothing else matters, because this Jesus is the linchpin. It's the cornerstone. It's the central point. And so that's what I discovered, and that's what I started to explore. And I'm going to share those findings with you here over the course of this series. Because if you can prove those things, if you can prove that Jesus was a real human, if you can also prove that he was the Son of God, if you can prove that he died, and you can prove that he was raised from the dead, the only person, that has ever, well, I guess that could be arguable, but let's say you prove that those four things are true and that he did raise from the dead, then there would be strong reason to believe that the other elements that surround the faith would also be true. That if Jesus is in fact who he said he was, and if Jesus did do what the scriptures, these ancient texts write, if that is true, then because he is the cornerstone of the Christian faith, it doesn't necessarily automatically prove everything else happened exactly the way that it is written. I mean, some of those things, other things in the Bible could be up for interpretation. There's certainly room for scrutiny around them. But the central argument for Christianity and for the life of Jesus as the gateway and the path and the vehicle to eternal life is true. It is true, if all those other things are true. So that is why I set out on this journey, right? Not because I was, in a theology major and I needed to pass a test, not because I, grew up in a home raised by a pastor or something, and this is what they told me, right? I wasn't, but because I wanted to know, as someone who, I think is at least reasonably intelligent, someone I would definitely describe myself as a critical thinker, an analytical thinker, as a pointed thinker, and someone who explores and searches for evidence in what works in all areas of life, not spirituality. Like spirituality, this has not been my central focus for my life, right? This is a project, but a really big project that I've spent a lot of years exploring, just like the other books and things that I have written. So what I want to present to you are 7 questions every intelligent skeptic should ask themselves about Jesus of Nazareth. And these are the 7 questions that I'm going to walk you through in this series. These are 7 questions that I've asked myself. They're hard questions. They're difficult questions. And I'm going to just share with you what my own answers and what my own research and what my own exploration has led to in answering these 7 questions. Now, I want to go ahead and give you the first question. The first question I've sort of already asked you, which is, what is your strategy for death? And another rendition of that question is it worth the time to explore eternity? Like, is it even worth the time to explore this? That's the first question, right? Because what is your strategy for death? I mean, look, I don't know exactly how long this series is going to be. I'm going to make it as long as I think it has to, and not a word longer. But I have no idea how this is going to shake out. I do know there's 7 parts to this, and I have documented my findings and thought through this, and I'm making it available now to you, and to my boys and to my family. But it's going to take some time, right? This is going to be however long it is for you to explore. And the first question you really gotta come to a decision on is, are you going to take the time to explore eternity? Are you going to take the time to learn about death and life, specifically life after death? And is there life after death? And if so, how and when and why and where and who and what is it? And how do you experience it? And so that's the very first question. What is your strategy for death and for overcoming death? And is it worth the time to explore eternity? Like all these questions, you're going to have to come up with the answer yourself. But I want to share with you the 3 reasons why I think it's worth the time to look at Christianity specifically as an option, right? As a potential, it's at least worth the time to explore this. Okay. That three reasons why I think it's this exploration, at least this series, if not a full out exploration of your own about all of Christianity, is worth exploring. So reason number 1 is pretty simple. This could have eternal implications for you, right? Eternal implications. So it seems like it's worth taking at least a few hours, which I presume this will probably be a few hours, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less. I don't know. But it's probably worth at least taking a few hours to explore what it is that so many people believe. So many people. Now, I don't know if you realize this, okay? But as of 2023, approximately 2.4 billion people on the planet, so about 31% of the Earth's population, and approximately 253 million Americans believe in Jesus as Christ. They are Christians. So 31% of the Earth's population, 2.4 billion people, are Christians. That's what, census data suggests. And 253 million Americans. So that is the largest grouping of people in the world of any world religion, okay? Of any major world religion, Christianity is the largest. It is the biggest. That doesn't necessarily, just in its own merit, mean it's the best or that it's right just because a lot of people believe it. I mean, that's not enough to sell me to go, yeah, I think there's a lot of people that believe a lot of stupid stuff, and a lot of people believe a lot of things that aren't true. So just because a lot of people believe it is certainly not evidence for why it is true. But if a whole bunch of people believe it, I go, that's probably worth at least exploring, right? It's probably worth at least looking at. And here's the thing. If Christians are wrong, then there is no afterlife at all. And so it's no big deal whether you believe or you're not. We're all dead. We die. Game over. Nothing else matters, right? So we might as well go live your life however you want to live it. Get the most out of the time that you've got here because it really doesn't matter, right? So if Christians are wrong, that's kind of the case. Now there are other religions that do have beliefs and viewpoints about what happens after death, and you certainly can explore those for yourself. But if Christians are right, and again, Christians are clear. You can argue that Christians may not be right, but you can't argue that they're not clear. I mean, Christians as people, like, they're not always clear, because even Christians aren't always clear on what they believe. Even me, right? For a lot of my life, I wasn't even totally clear on all this stuff, which is part of why I'm laying it out here. So Christians can be confusing, but the Christian faith, as what is documented in the Bible, which you can go read for yourself pretty much anywhere in the globe, you can read it on your phone, and you can, it's been widely produced, is very, very clear on who gets into heaven, how you get into heaven, what heaven is. And so if Christians are right, this has eternal implications on your soul, right? Eternal implications. And I mean, just think about this. If hell is real, if hell is real, if hell is an actual place, Hades, right? Ancient scripture would refers to it as Hades. If hell is real, and I'm not saying just yet that it is, but if it was real, wouldn't you want to do everything you could to avoid it? I mean, if it is real, you might want to pay attention to that and go, what is it? And so I'm going to just include here a quick rattling of just a couple verses in the Bible. Again, because the Bible is my source of truth for Christianity, meaning that for me, what it means to be a Christian is held in the Bible, not by what Billy Graham says or any other pastor or any church or anything. It's what is written in the Bible, and I'll explain later why the Bible is the source of truth, or my source of truth on what it means to be a Christian, and therefore, in my case, the source of truth for my life. But here are a couple verses out of the Bible that just describe hell. Okay, so I'll just give these to you real quick. So Revelation 21:8 describes hell as a fiery lake of burning sulfur. Matthew 25:46, and by the way, if you're new to the Bible, I'll explain in just a few minutes what these references, Matthew 25:46, what does that mean, and how does it work, and what do those numbers mean? I'll explain that in a minute. But Matthew 25:46 describes hell as eternal punishment. 2 Thessalonians 1:9 describes hell as everlasting destruction. Matthew 13, chapter 13, verse 50, describes it as a blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Mark chapter 9, verse 43 describes it as a place where the fire never goes out. Revelation 14:11 says, the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and there is no rest, day or night, no rest. Jude 1:7 says they serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. And Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 says they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know exactly what all that means, but what I'm pretty clear on is it doesn't sound awesome, right? Like, doesn't sound awesome. It sure as heck doesn't sound like a party. And sometimes people think of hell and they joke like, I hope they serve beer in hell, because they joke like hell is somehow fun and a party. Well, if you are a Christian, make no mistake about it, there is nothing fun. That does not sound fun to me. No rest, eternal fire, tormented day and night. No, that does not sound awesome. Okay. So again, you may not believe all that yet, but if you do, you go, it might be, or even if you don't believe it, you go, if there's a chance I could end up in that place, it might be worth me taking a couple minutes to figure out how do I make sure I don't end up there, right? At least that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if that's what you're thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. Now, on the flip side, if eternity is actually real, like if heaven is actually an accessible place, if heaven is an accessible concept, if heaven if heaven really is real, and I'm not asking you to believe right now that it is, I'm just saying, if it is, wouldn't you spend your entire waking life being consumed with how to get there? Like, if there is an option for eternity, if there is an option for whatever this beautiful afterlife is, isn't it worth exploring it? And then if you come to believe that it really is available to you, wouldn't you want to focus on it a little bit more? Wouldn't you want to lend a little bit more of your time, a little bit more of your mind share, a little bit more of your thinking? Maybe it would affect the way that you live if it really were true. At least for me, I think it is. And the good news is, okay, so I'll just tell you this right up front. The good news for Christians living Christianity according to the Bible is that heaven might be much easier to access than you think. Way easier. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, getting into heaven according to the Christian faith has nothing to do with how good you are. We'll explain what that is. One of the questions is, how do we get into heaven? So we'll talk about that. But it actually could be way easier than you think. And it doesn't mean that your life can't be fun or that you can't, do wonderful things. It's quite the opposite. It means that according to the Christian faith, it's quite accessible. And we'll walk through that if you're still listening by the time we get there. But we have some tougher questions that we have to answer first. There's some more fundamental things that need to stand up to some scrutiny before we get to that question. But, I believe, and now I'm going to step out of character here and go to just tell you my beliefs, right? So part of my goal here is I want to be a guide. I want to facilitate you through a logical discovery for you to come to your own conclusions. I have some of my own conclusions, and I will try to step out of character when I'm sharing with you my own conclusions to hopefully separate and preserve and maintain the objective and hopefully, somewhat unbiased, or at least attempted unbiased exploration for you in your own journey to go through some of the very tough questions that I struggled with answering myself. So right now I'm stepping out and saying, I do believe in this now based on everything you're about to learn. And what I have come to believe about the devil is I think that the devil defeats most people not through destruction, but through distraction. I believe that the devil defeats most people not through destruction, but through distraction. You see, if the devil can keep you focused on anything other than learning the truth, then he wins, right? If the devil can occupy your mind with anything and everything other than what it takes to get into heaven, then he wins. If the devil is real and his objective is to, steal, kill, and destroy, and his goal is to harm you and to prevent you from accessing heaven, he doesn't have to hurt you. He just has to distract you from learning about heaven. And so the bar for him to win is actually pretty low. It's pretty easy because he doesn't even have to convince you that heaven isn't real. He just has to prevent you and occupy from learning about it yourself. And so that is how I think he does it. The devil defeats most people not through destruction, but through distraction. And here's the thing that's dangerous about that is we live in a world of distraction. We live in a world with more entertainment available to us, more communication, more experiences, many things that are wonderful things, good things, right? Movies and music and the arts and books and business and ambitions and goals and marathons and just like, kids and all, beautiful things of the world. But there's so much of that it's so easy to be occupied with the things of this world that we can't even carve out a few minutes to explore eternity. And so for most of us, we don't have a confident eternal life because we're distracted. So I know that you're busy. I know that there are a lot of distractions. You could call them temptations. You could just call them beautiful blessings and awesome things to do. But I know that you don't have a lot of time. And so part of my goal here is I'm trying to boil this all down for you into a few hours, right? So that you don't have to take, decades to explore and discover like I have, that you don't have to read, dozens and dozens of books like, many of the world's, leading thinkers on this subject. But that you can listen to all of this in the matter of a few hours and that you can get the core points and that you can at least understand with clarity what Christianity is about, what it is purporting, and what evidence is there for it being real and true, not just spiritual and faith and emotional and, clouds and harps and stuff like that. What real world evidence is there that any of this is true? And that's what we're going to talk about. But and I do want to say, you may listen to all of this and at the end decide you don't believe any of it. And even though you might go, well, that would be a waste of time, I hope, and I just want to, I want to present the possibility that even if that happened, you should consider that a win. Because at least you would be clear on what you don't believe. Does that make sense? Right? Again, my goal is not necessarily here to convert you to believe what I believe. My goal, and this is why I shared the dedication right up front, my goal is to share with my sons my own documented journey of how I've come to believe what I believe. And, I would hope, my hope is that, of course, they're my sons. I hope that they one day believe what I believe. But if I'm not, I may not be around to convince them. And so I just want them to be able to explore for themselves. And, I decided to make this available for anyone who cares to show up. So, even if you get to the end and you decide you don't believe any of this, I'd call that a win. I call that a win because at least you go, at least I'm clear. At least I'm clear what Christianity is, and I'm clear that I understand it, and I'm clear that I don't believe it, and I'm clear that that doesn't work for me. I'm clear. And so then you're free to go explore other things or decide you don't care to explore other things. At least you're clear. So I would consider that a win. But you would at least have a fair bit of confidence that you understand what Christianity is and what is required to be called a Christian and what that means. Now, on the flip side, perhaps you will follow this exploration of evidence that I'm about to present to you. And perhaps you will come to believe in Jesus of Nazareth as Christ, as the Messiah, which I know right now, for some of you, like me several years ago, you might go, that's crazy. There's no way I'm going to believe that. There's no way I believe in miracles and somebody dying and coming back to life. There's no way I believe in these things, right? But I would just table that for a minute and just go, well, if you go through the evidence here and you come on this exploration, there is the possibility, right, that somehow you would maybe then believe what I believe and what, billions of now a couple billion people on the planet also believe. And if that's the case, clearly it would be a good use of your time, right? So that's reason number one why I think that you should spend some time exploring this, is because it has eternal implications. Reason number two why I think you should commit to finishing this entire series is because this might provide answers for you and a source of truth for your life. What do I mean by that? I mean that whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a believer or not, whether you're spiritual or not, whether you're atheist or Buddhist or any other type of faith, I think for a lot of us, we can intuitively look at the world that we live in and say, something is wrong. Like something is broken about the world that we live in today. Something is off. Something is missing. Something is not right here. Because there's so many people who are unhappy. Like, why is there's so much addiction, so much sexual immorality, so much anxiety, so much worry, so much suicide, right? There's so much pain, so much unexplained tragedy, so many difficult things, and not even just for like, people who are struggling, but even wealthy people and famous people who they're unhappy, they're unsettled, they're killing themselves, they're ODing on drugs, their lives are being destroyed, marriages, families torn apart. Why? There's something missing, and there's something big that is missing. There's something absent of the world that you go, things aren't quite right here. There shouldn't be so much sadness, so much pain, so much heartache, so many families torn apart, so much destruction, right? There shouldn't be kids who are sexually abused, right? There shouldn't be people who are raped. There shouldn't be people who are murdered for no reason. There's something wrong here. And even if you don't believe in Christianity or Jesus or whatever, like if you can look at the world and at least go, yeah, there's something wrong, and you're looking for a source of truth to navigate through that, then I want to encourage you to stick around. Because if you haven't looked at this topic of Jesus, if you haven't explored it and you haven't scrutinized it and you haven't asked yourself the tough questions, then this is one you should investigate. Because I personally, I'm looking for answers that make sense of it all. Right. And if it is true, right, if all this Jesus stuff, if all this Christianity, if all this Bible stuff is true, then it means that there are answers for how I should live my life. And it means that there are implications in what I should do. And it means that there is a great implication to how I live my life today and during this life, and what that is going to mean for eternity. And so I need to pay attention to that and go, don't you want a source of truth for that? Not just people's opinions, not just emotions, not just preferences, not just instincts, not just a trending video on social, not these things that change like the wind. But don't you want an actual bankable, reliable, unfailing credible source of truth for which to base your life upon. If you're looking for that, then I want to encourage you to stick around, because Christianity offers that, a clear source of truth. And it may not be what you like, but it would give you something that there is right and wrong. There is true and false. And there is clarity about why the world is the way it is and how it operates and what happens in eternity. So then it makes sense. If you're looking for that, it makes sense to look at this. And part of this to me is also intuitive about, there is this intuitive nature for us to call out to God. I mean, who in the world doesn't cry out to God when they experience pain, like physical pain, or desperation or hopelessness, right? Like, I think of the times when I've been most sick in my life. One time I was seasick in Costa Rica, and it was horrendous. It was awful. It was terrible. There's been other times where I was sick after I had a hernia surgery, and then I took medicine after, and it made me so sick. I was in so much pain. And instinctively, I cry out to God. I say, God, if you're there, help me. God, if you're there, save me. How is it that we instinctively do that? I now believe, I didn't always believe, but I now believe it's because we were created to do that. Because we were created by the Creator to, for the Creator's enjoyment and for community with the Creator, and that we have this God-sized hole in our heart that we're looking to fill. And again, you might not believe any of this is true by the time all this is said and done, but if you want a source of truth and you don't yet have one, right? Like, what is your source of truth? What is the source of truth in your life? Is it the last book you read? Is it what you saw on CNN? Is it what you saw on Fox? Is it what you saw from Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Rush Limbaugh or Joe Biden? Or like, what is your source of truth? Where do you anchor your life to? What can you look to and say, this is what my life is based on? This is what I know to be true. This is what I know to be real. Is it science? And I'm a big fan of science because science can prove a lot of things, but, science also has a lot of problems, right? Scientists used to believe the world was flat. That was quote unquote true, right? We used to believe the sun revolved around the earth. That was true. That was, scientifically proven and true. That's what we believe. So, but even science has lots of shortcomings and lots of flip-flops that it has made, as you look over time. So what is your source of truth? If you need one or you're looking for one, you should stick around. Reason number 3, the third reason why I think that you should explore this is because if the story of Jesus is real and there is a resurrection, then that means there is a heaven. And if there is a heaven, then that means that I could get there too. And that means that not only would I get to meet Jesus, but also I would get to meet and be reunited with every believer in my family whom I've lost. Right? In short, if the story of Jesus is true, then it is possible, it is factual, that you will actually never have to be separated from those people that you love. And so that matters to me personally, right? Like, what person do you care the most about who has died? Like in your life, who do you care most about that has died? Or who do you care most about right now that is living that you would want to spend eternity with? Right? Like, who is it in your life that it would break your heart, it would wreck you to be separated from that person? if everything you're about to learn about Jesus is true, then it's not only just possible or likely, but it is guaranteed that if you believe this and that person believes this, that you will never be separated, that you would actually be with your loved ones forever, and that you would actually be loved forever, a confident eternal life. And so if that's possible, wouldn't you want to spend a couple hours, to explore the option of how that might come true? So I realize I'm spending a lot of time convincing you why you should spend time. And that's probably the number one thing I want to convince you of, is I want to convince you to spend time exploring this topic, right? I don't necessarily want to convince you that you need to believe what I believe, but I want to convince you to spend time on this topic because it has eternal implications. I mean, what could be more significant than this? All right. So that said, I want to share a couple disclaimers and just give you a quick overview of where we're going and what this is going to be. And so that we can continue getting into it. But the first of the 7 questions, this is where you're already, we're mostly through the first question, which is, what is my strategy for overcoming death? And is it worth taking the time to explore eternity? Okay, so let me give you a few disclaimers because this is important, right? So first of all, what we're about to embark upon is very different than anything that I have ever done. Okay, so I want to just make sure this is out in the open, all right? I don't want to pretend to be someone that I'm not. So first of all, I am not a pastor, right? I've never been to seminary. I don't have any theology degrees. I don't work at a church. I don't even lead a nonprofit. I am not a pastor. So, and part of that I think will be good for some of you. Like some of you might go, well, I'm not going to listen to this guy because, what does he know? But my audience here is not people who only listen to pastors. Like my audience is actually people who would go, yeah, I don't think I would ever listen to a pastor because I'm not sure I could trust a person, so we're going to look at evidence together, but I'm going to do my best to use through this whole series plain non-jargon terminology. By the way, I guess it's worth answering the question, well, who am I, right? I haven't really talked that much about that. And depending on who you are, you may not even have a clue who I am in the first place. So I am a business author and speaker. So I'm an entrepreneur who is also an author and a speaker. So I am a New York Times bestselling author. My first book was called Take the Stairs. It's a book about the psychology of overcoming self-discipline, of overcoming procrastination and increasing self-discipline. My second book was called Procrastinate on Purpose: 5 Permissions to Multiply Your Time. And in that book, we looked at, and studied why do so many people feel overwhelmed and busy and behind and buried, and how do you actually multiply time? How is it possible to create more time? But I was one of the youngest people in history to be inducted into the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame. I am a 2-time world champion of public speaking in a contest that was put on by an organization called Toastmasters International. So, my career is as a researcher, as an explorer. I am breaking down, like I have a knack for consuming massive volumes of information. By the way, I also have a master's degree, so I have an MBA. But I have, I take massive volumes of information and I try to distill it down to just the core elements and then sort of repackage it and represent it in a way that other people can quickly benefit from. So I kind of think of myself as like a giant information sieve, that you would strain spaghetti, like a colander. Like I'm a sieve, and I've done that a few times. So, my first book was really understanding how do you become more disciplined in your life. That was Take the Stairs. My second book, which I also, by the way, created a TED Talk, and the TED Talk went viral, got several million views, was all about how to multiply time and like, how do you break free of being busy? And then my wife and I built an 8-figure sales training company. We started that in 2006. We grew that to 8 figures. We had a couple hundred team members. We sold that in 2018. And then we started Brand Builders Group, which is what we do today. And so what we do for a living actually has nothing to do with anything that I'm sharing in this series. Like it's completely off. We are a personal brand strategy firm. So we actually help authors and speakers and coaches, and we call them mission-driven messengers. We help mission-driven messengers to increase their reach and grow their reputation and turn their reputation into revenue, right? So we have like basically a consulting or training company that trains authors and speakers how to get their content out to more people. So I really don't have the reason I'm sharing this here is I don't have any other outlet for this. I don't have any other place to put this. So I'm just putting this content out in the world. You know, we are very much content creators, but I've never, ever created a content piece so in depth on, you know, a topic that is related to spirituality. But I'm a curious entrepreneur. I'm a lifelong student. I always am trying to critically evaluate the best way to solve things. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a skeptic, and I think this is an important issue to look at. So, you know, that's why we're doing it. But, you know, part of that disclaimer, because I've not made a professional study of this, okay, it's possible, I just want to let you know that, like, I might have minor discrepancies in things that I share, like, especially around pronunciation and names, right? Like, you know, I might pronounce words wrong, and some of, you know, in these ancient texts, some of these names and cities are like crazy, you know, compared to what we're used to seeing today. And like, I'm sure I'll pronounce things wrong. Please forgive my ignorance on those kinds of things, right? Again, I haven't made a lifelong study of this. I'm not academically trained in this topic area per se, not formally academically trained. However, I have taken a great deal of time to verify the factual stability of what I will be presenting to you, right? So I'm not, everything that I'm presenting to you should stand up to scrutiny. I will, that's the whole point of this. So, but, you know, hopefully you can forgive potential minor, you know, issues like that without throwing out the major stuff, right? There's no way I'm getting the major stuff wrong here. I mean, the major stuff here is really what the focus of the conversation is about. But I just say all that to say I'm not a historian trying to debate and prove or disprove scrupulous or, you know, or minute facts and details. I'm an everyday ordinary person, but who's laying out fundamentally agreed upon high level logical historical facts that are widely accepted, that do provide evidence and historical support and archaeological support potentially for Jesus and the life of Jesus of Nazareth. So, you know, that people don't just have to have blind faith, right? I mean, that's part of what I'm doing here is just going, I struggle with the idea of going, yeah, just have blind faith. I need more evidence. I need more structure. I need a little more sustenance that I can just get my mind latched around. And so that's the journey I've gone on, which I'm sharing with you. The other thing that I want to tell you up front is, like, I don't have anything to gain from this. I don't have a goal here of like making a bunch of money, or I don't even know what this is. I mean, what I'm doing right now, I literally don't even know what this is. I'm just sharing with you, you know, the notes that I've compiled over years. And so I don't have a goal here beyond what I shared in the opening dedication. My goal is to provide a documentation for my sons, for my two boys, so that one day, if I'm not here to tell them myself, they would just know. They would at least know why and how I came to believe what I believe. So I don't have anything to gain from this. In fact, I have quite a lot to lose. You know, I suspect that some of you might even be listening to this. Some of my clients, you know, at Brand Builders Group, some of my, you know, the people who hire me to speak at their conventions and their company meetings, some of my readers from my other books, some of my blog subscribers, some of my other podcast subscribers, some of them are going to think I'm absolutely insane for, first of all, sharing my faith and opening up publicly about a topic which frankly has become quite controversial these days, to just share your faith. So it's a huge risk in that regard. And honestly, I mean, the thing I'm most terrified is that I have some of my closest friends are not Christians. We have people who work in our company who are not Christians, and I love them dearly, dearly. And I my greatest fear is I don't want to offend people that I love and that I'm close to. That's not my goal. But I also know that there is the risk of that happening because I'm sharing what I believe to be true, and I'm sharing, that historical journey, and so, I know that I could offend some people, and that's not my goal, but it is a risk, and it's a risk that I'm willing to take because, again, I think eternity is what's on the line here for my sons and for you and for anyone who listens to this in the future. So I know that people are going to make fun of me. I know some of my friends and family are going to be offended. I know that I'm very likely to lose a bunch of followers over this, right? I mean, there's a bunch of people who follow me that probably just don't even want to hear or even care to know what my beliefs are and will be upset that I'm sharing them. So I know those things, and I say all that to say the reason I'm doing this anyway is because I'm not interested in money. I'm not interested in followers. I'm not interested in placating. I'm interested in truth. I'm not just trying to share my opinion. I'm only interested in sharing truth. I'm a truth seeker. I want to know what is the evidence that exists for something to be true. And so if you're someone who follows my work, I want you just to know that I will always seek truth, even when it's inconvenient and even when it creates conflict. And even if it comes at the cost of negative negative consequences or implications in my life, because I'm not interested in positive outcomes that aren't based on truth. So anyways, that's my disclaimer. So let me give you an overview of the series, and then, we'll keep rocking and rolling. So I already said this earlier that admittedly, I want to be right up front with you and go, some of these things are difficult to believe and understand on the surface of Christianity. I mean, there's prophecies about a coming Messiah or a savior of the world. And I'm like, prophecy? Really? Like, even that word to me is weird. Like, really? Prophecy? The idea of miraculous healings, God speaking through burning bushes, God sending plagues upon civilizations, parting the sea, and then, ultimately the one that matters most of all, a man predicting his own death, predicting his resurrection, and then him actually rising from the dead. Hard to believe on the surface, so we're going to explore it. So one thing I also want to ask you here is, if Jesus is the linchpin and the cornerstone of all of this in the Christian faith, and you're not a Christian, okay, so you don't believe, or you don't yet believe, or you're not totally sure what you believe, if you don't, if you fall into any of those categories and you don't yet fully believe in Jesus, then my question for you, and this is the first thing I want to encourage you to get clear on, is what exactly is it that you don't believe? Okay. And I want to encourage you to write that down, right? Don't, just for yourself. You're not going to share it with anybody else, but just, I think a part of the journey for yourself getting clear on what you believe, it starts with going, and I want to just express, it's okay to not believe this, right? Some of this stuff is hard to believe. And again, you may not believe it at all when we're done either, but that's okay. But I want you to be clear, and I would encourage you to go, what exactly is it that you don't believe? So do you first believe that Jesus didn't exist at all? Like he wasn't an actual person. He didn't actually walk the earth. Okay. So if it's that, write that down. Or maybe you say, no, I believe there was a person named Jesus. Okay. So then the second question is like, okay, do you believe he's the Son of God? Right? Like, do you believe that he performed miracles? Do you believe who he said he was? And you go, and maybe that's where you lose it. And you go, no, I believe he could have been this, he could be the Son of God. Or do you just believe like he didn't rise from the dead? Or you struggle to go, yeah, I struggle to believe that somebody who died and then like came back to life. I've never seen that. I don't know anyone who has seen that. That's the part I don't believe. Which, just for what it's worth, for me, I go, yeah, I've never seen that either. Nor does anyone that I know, have they ever seen that. And so that's part of what would make it compelling, right? As I go, if there actually was somebody who said they were going to die, who predicted their death, and then not only did they predict their death, but then they died, and not only did they die, they also predicted their resurrection, and not only did they predict their death and resurrection, then they actually resurrected from the dead and came back to life, and people saw them. If that's true, I'm going with that guy, right? Like, that's like Babe Ruth calling this shot, for the home run. I go, yeah, if somebody did that, I'm going with that guy, right? Because as much as I have struggle believing all these other things, I go, someone who did that, I go, yeah, that's my guy. Like that guy's got it figured in, right? So maybe you don't believe in the resurrection, or maybe you just struggle to believe. Honestly, I've been here. Maybe you struggle to believe that there is a heaven or a God at all, right? And here's something, honestly, this is one of the biggest things that I've struggled with. And I think a lot of you probably struggle with it. Some of you listening are probably Christians and you still struggle with this, is you go, I just don't understand, how can there be a good God if bad things happen? Right? And you go, that's the part I struggle with. Like, how can there be a good God that allows bad things to happen? And I spent years struggling with that question. And if that's you, I'll just share a short little note on this one. One thing you should know right up front is that Christians, to be a Christian, Christians are not people who believe that bad things shouldn't happen to good people. That's not what it means to be Christian. Christians are not people who think that bad things shouldn't happen to good people. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Christians believe that the worst thing, death by crucifixion, asphyxiation, having nails driven into a man's wrist, to be tortured, the worst thing happened to the best person. Jesus, the Christ, the Son of God, God incarnate, the person without sin. That's what it means to be Christian. So just so you're clear on that, right? Some people go, well, I can't be a Christian because I struggle to believe that a good God would let bad things happen to good people. That's not what it means to be Christian. The opposite is true. Christians believe that the worst thing happened to the best person. Doesn't mean we like it. It just means we believe it. It means that our faith allows it and is hinged upon that idea. And Jesus himself said, okay, assuming for now that Jesus is real and assuming that the scriptures are accurate, which we'll dive into, but Jesus himself said verbatim, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. He said that in John chapter 16, verse 33. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. So Christians, to be Christian doesn't mean you don't believe bad things happen. It is the opposite. It means bad things happen. Bad things have happened, are happening, and will continue to happen for a while until we get to the end, which, we'll explore and talk about. But that's John 16:33. So if Jesus was real and his death was real and his resurrection is real, then we can presume that the things that he said are true. So Jesus, again, is the cornerstone of this whole conversation, and that's why we got to explore what basis and evidence is there for that. So perhaps that's part of what you don't believe, that there's a heaven or a God at all, and how could that be if it's a good God and yet bad things happen? Or perhaps, maybe you're just like me, and for a lot of my life, I just said, I'm just not sure to make of it all. I just don't know. It's hard to believe, and everyone has a different opinion, and this church, this church says that, and this church says that, and these people presume to say they love people, but then they hate everybody, and they're mean to people, and I look at Christians and I go, I don't know, I want to live like them, or you hear about pastors, or priests, right? The whole thing about the Catholic priests, and you go, well, I certainly don't want to be like those people, like molesting children, while they're running a church, like. And you go, look, I get it. It's horrific, right? So but what I would say is, don't look at Christians to learn about Christianity. Don't look at Christians to learn about Christianity. Look at Christ to learn about Christianity. And in order to look at Christ, we have to look at Scripture. We have to look at what was written about him and what was documented about what he said. Don't look at Christians to learn about Christianity. Look at Christ to learn about Christianity. So we're going to do that. And also, it's like, I want evidence. I want evidence. Where's the evidence of this? Not just, it was written in a book a long time ago, so it must be true. How do we know? And that's what we're going to explore. But it also needs to reconcile with common sense for me, right? And I go, hey, I struggle to believe a dude rose from the dead. So like, how do I get past that? We're going to explore that. That's going to be one of the questions we look at. So I want to examine the writings. I want to examine these teachings. I want to examine this historical documentation against, also my own life lessons, like the things that I've learned and experienced. How does this apply to me? And does this fit in with my own intuition? Because there is certainly an element of intuition and faith and emotion. And I go, I do want to find things that align. I would caution you there, though, to go, at least for me, I put the least amount of the least amount of weight on that part of going, I have to, like it or believe it, or it has to reconcile with my own reality, just because, my opinion has changed on things over time, even in my own life. And there's things that I've never seen, but I do believe they've happened, right? Like, I've never personally witnessed the genocide, the hatred of genocide in concentration camps, but just because I've never seen it doesn't mean I don't believe it happened. I believe it did happen. And there's well-documented evidence to support the fact that it did occur and it took place. And that's what I'm looking at. So, but one overall just humble request for you as we get into this is, I just want you to consider going through this whole series, this whole recount. And if you find one thing that's hard to believe, just sort of table it. Don't throw out everything because there's one thing that's hard to believe. Just sort of like identify it and go, yeah, I still have issues with this one piece, but keep moving forward, right? What I have found on this journey, there's been times where I go, yeah, I struggle with this, but then the more I would go, okay, let me just keep going. I table it, and then I come back to it. I have actually found that there's really good evidence one way or the other to believe or not believe if you just go back and explore it. But you don't have to throw everything out if there's one little piece. Just sort of like document it, capture it, or note it in your brain and set it aside and keep moving forward. But at least on this journey, for me, everything that I've initially been skeptical of, I've later gone back and investigated in detail, and I have found satisfactory evidence once I dove into it. And so, I'm going to try to share a lot of that with you here in this series, but I can't cover everything there is to know, right? So just note it. Don't judge yourself for having it, right? Not good, or don't throw everything out, but also don't make yourself feel bad because you don't believe it. Just sort of grab it, table it, isolate it, table it, and come back to it later. So what are the 7 questions of this series? So let's give you that overview. The 7 questions that I'm going to address are the ones that I've gone down in my own life journey to discover truth. And those are the outline for this, whatever this is, this series. I don't know if this is going to be a book one day or just a podcast series or YouTube videos.